The year is 116 AD. An old man stands at the edge of the world. He stands on the sandy shores of the Persian Gulf, the warm waters lapping at his boots. He is the most powerful man on earth. He commands the loyalty of 30 legions. He is the master of the Mediterranean, the king of kings, the pharaoh of Egypt and the emperor of Rome. He watches a merchant ship unfurl its sails, catching the wind, bound for the mysterious, spice-rich lands of India. And as he watches that ship disappear over the horizon, this old man, he begins to weep. He weeps not because he has failed, he weeps because he has succeeded too late. He whispers to the wind, "If I were still young, I would have crossed the sea to the Indus. I would have outdone Alexander." This is Marcus Ulpius Trajanus. To history, he is simply Trajan. We often think of Rome as a static empire, marble statues and guys in togas standing around the forum. But under Trajan, Rome was a wolf. It was a predator that never slept. He took the empire to its absolute physical limit, stretching the borders from the mists of Scotland to the burning sands of Kuwait. He built the boldest monuments, fought the bloodiest wars, and earned a title that no other emperor, not Augustus, not Constantine, ever held. The Senate didn't just call him emperor, they called him Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. But who was the man behind the marvel? How did a provincial soldier from Spain end up sitting on the throne of the Caesars? And what was the cost, in gold, in blood, and in human suffering, of making Rome greater than it had ever been before? Today, we are walking the path of the legions. We are crossing the Danube, we are marching into the east, and we are witnessing the apex of the Roman Empire. This is the story of Trajan, the soldier, the builder, the conqueror. To understand Trajan, we first have to understand the terror that preceded him. Before Trajan, Rome was ruled by Domitian. Domitian was capable, but paranoid. His reign was a suffocating blanket of treason trials, executions, and fear. When he was finally assassinated in a palace coup in 96 AD, the Senate scrambled to find a replacement who wouldn't murder them. They chose Nerva. Nerva was safe. He was old, he was a lawyer, and most importantly, he was childless. But Nerva had a problem. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguards, didn't respect him. They bullied him. They held him hostage in his own palace. Rome teetered on the edge of yet another civil war. Nerva knew he needed insurance. He needed someone who commanded the respect of the only thing that mattered in Rome, the army. In October of 97 AD, a message arrived at the headquarters of the legions in Upper Germany. The commander there was a grit-toothed, 50-something career soldier named Trajan. The message was simple. You have been adopted. You are now the son of the emperor. You are the heir to the world. When Nerva died 3 months later, Trajan didn't rush back to Rome to throw a party. He stayed on the Rhine, he inspected the fortifications, he checked the discipline of the troops, he made sure the borders were secure. This was the first sign of who Trajan was. He wasn't a politician playing soldier, he was a soldier who happened to be a politician. When he finally entered Rome in 99 AD, he did something unprecedented. He didn't ride in a chariot surrounded by gold and guards. He walked. He walked into the city on foot, eye to level with the citizens. He embraced the senators. He walked among the people. In that single afternoon, the dark cloud of Domitian's terror evaporated. Pliny the Younger, a senator and famous writer of the time, wrote about this moment. He said, "He is one of us. He does not fear us, and we do not fear him." But Trajan knew that love from the Senate wasn't enough to sustain an empire. The Roman economy was shaky. The legions were restless. Rome needed money, Rome needed glory, and most of all, Rome needed a war. Trajan looked north. Across the wide, freezing waters of the Danube River, there was a kingdom that had been a thorn in Rome's side for decades. Dacia, modern-day Romania. Dacia was ruled by a cunning warrior king named Decebalus. He had humiliated Rome in the past, extracting tribute payments in exchange for peace. Imagine that. Rome paying protection money to a barbarian king. To a man like Trajan, this was intolerable. But there was another reason to look at Dacia: geology. The Carpathian mountains of Dacia were rumored to be sitting on top of one of the largest deposits of gold and silver in the ancient world. Trajan didn't just want a victory, he wanted a heist. In 101 AD, the legions began to move. Trajan wasn't interested in a border skirmish. He mobilized a massive force, tens of thousands of legionaries and auxiliaries. This was the Roman war machine at its absolute peak. These weren't the raw recruits of later eras. These were hardened professionals, equipped with the famous Lorica segmentata armor and rectangular shields. But Decebalus was ready. The Dacians were terrifying enemies. They wielded a weapon called the falx, a two-handed, curved scythe sword. It hit with such force that it could cleave through a Roman helmet or slice through a shield. In fact, archaeological evidence suggests the Romans had to redesign their helmets during this war, adding cross-bracing to the top just to stop the falx from splitting their skulls. The First Dacian War was a brutal slog through thick forests and mountain passes. Trajan led from the front. History tells us that during the Battle of Tupi, when the surgeons ran out of bandages for the wounded, Trajan cut up his own imperial robes to bind the soldiers' cuts. He forced Decebalus to surrender, but he didn't destroy him. Not yet. He took a knee, accepted the submission, and left a garrison. Trajan returned to Rome for a triumph, adopting the title Dacius. But Decebalus wasn't done. The moment Trajan left, the Dacian king started rebuilding his forts. He raided Roman allies. He captured a Roman commander, Longinus, and tried to use him as leverage. Longinus, in a display of Roman virtue, committed suicide rather than let himself be used against the emperor. Trajan was furious. The truce was broken. In 105 AD, he returned, and this time he wasn't looking for submission. He was looking for annihilation. To get to the heart of Dacia, Trajan commissioned his brilliant architect, Apollodorus of Damascus, to do the impossible. They built a bridge across the Danube. This wasn't a pontoon bridge. This was a permanent structure of stone and timber, over a kilometer long, spanning a fast-flowing river. It was a marvel of engineering that signaled to the world, there is nowhere you can hide. Rome can walk on water to get to you. The Second Dacian War was a siege of attrition. The Romans systematically dismantled the Dacian mountain fortresses. They closed in on the capital, Samizegatusa Regia. The end of the war plays out like a movie. The capital falls. The Dacian nobility, rather than surrender, pass around a cup of poison. King Decebalus flees into the mountains on horseback, hunted by Roman cavalry scouts. Cornered against a tree, with the Romans closing in to capture him alive for a parade in Rome, Decebalus pulls out a knife and slits his own throat. The war was over, and the payout was staggering. Contemporary sources claim Trajan brought back 165 tons of gold and 331 tons of silver. While those numbers might be exaggerated, the influx of wealth was real. It crashed the price of gold across the Mediterranean. Rome suddenly had cash, oceans of it. To commemorate this victory, Trajan didn't just build a statue. He built a comic strip in stone that spiraled 100 feet into the air. Trajan's Column. It still stands in Rome today. If you unwind the frieze, it's 200 meters of narrative art, depicting the army marching, building forts, harvesting corn, and fighting. It is a monument, not just to Trajan, but to the Roman soldier. With the Dacian gold secured, Trajan transformed from a destroyer into a creator. He launched the greatest building spree Rome had ever seen. He didn't just build vanity projects, he built infrastructure. He built a new harbor at Ostia to secure the grain supply, ensuring Rome wouldn't starve. He paved roads through marshes. He built aqueducts. But the centerpiece was the Forum of Trajan. It was a massive complex financed entirely by the Dacian spoils. It had libraries, one for Latin, one for Greek. It had a massive basilica for law and business, and next to it, the markets of Trajan, essentially the world's first shopping mall. A multi-story complex of brick and concrete that housed over 150 shops and offices. This was the bread part of bread and circuses, but Trajan went further. He implemented a program called the Alimentaria. This was a welfare program for orphans and poor children in Italy. It was clever. The state loaned money to landowners, and the interest those landowners paid went into a fund to buy food for poor kids. It stimulated agriculture and fed the hungry at the same time. It showed a side of Trajan that wasn't about conquest, but about care. He understood that the strength of the empire lay in its next generation. Rome, under Trajan, was humming. The population reached perhaps 1 million people. Goods flowed from the Silk Road, from Africa, from the North Sea. It was cosmopolitan, wealthy and stable. Pliny wrote to Trajan constantly during this time, asking for advice on everything. "Oh, Emperor, how should I handle the fire brigade? Oh, Emperor, what do I do about these Christians?" Trajan's replies, preserved in history, show a man who was practical, fair, and incredibly detail-oriented. He was a micromanager, yes, but a competent one. He was the Optimus Princeps. But deep down, the old soldier was restless. The administration, the paperwork, the endless Senate meetings. It wasn't enough. He looked at the maps. He looked east, to the Parthian Empire. Parthia was the other superpower. Based in modern-day Iran and Iraq, they were the counterweight to Rome. They had humiliated Rome before. Remember Cassius, the man who had molten gold poured down his throat? Rome remembered. In 113 AD, the Parthian king interfered in the politics of Armenia, a buffer state between the two empires. Trajan took this as a personal insult, but really, it was an excuse. Trajan was over 60 years old. He knew this was his last chance for immortality. He wanted to do what Julius Caesar had planned, but died before achieving. He wanted to conquer the East. He marched out of Rome for the final time. The campaign was a blitzkrieg. In 114, he took Armenia. In 115, he swept down into Mesopotamia. The Roman legions were unstoppable. They captured the Parthian capital, Ctesiphon, forcing the Parthian king to flee into the night. Trajan captured the king's golden throne and sent it back to Rome. He didn't stop. He pushed south, following the Tigris River all the way to the Persian Gulf. This is the moment we started with. 116 AD. The map of the Roman Empire is now the largest it will ever be. If you look at a GIF of the Roman borders, expanding and contracting over 1,000 years, this moment is the high watermark, the absolute peak. Trajan declares Mesopotamia a new province. He creates the province of Assyria. He is ruling over Babylon. But maps are deceiving. Painting a territory red doesn't mean you control it. As Trajan stood on that shore dreaming of India, the embers of rebellion were already catching fire behind him. The Jewish populations in the eastern provinces, tired of tension and oppression, erupted in a massive revolt, the Kitos War. Simultaneously, the Parthian guerrilla fighters cut supply lines. The heat, the disease, and the sheer distance began to wear the legions down. The fortress city of Hatra in the desert refused to fall. Trajan personally besieged it. History tells us the emperor himself rode within bowshot of the walls, and his majestic grey horse was targeted by enemy archers. An arrow struck a member of his cavalry guard, killing him instantly. The emperor was inches from death. The siege failed. The water ran out. The flies were unbearable. Trajan, the man who never lost, had to turn back. His health began to fail. He had suffered a stroke or perhaps dropsy, edema. He was swollen, weak, and exhausted. The conqueror was being conquered by time. He tried to limp back to Rome. He wanted to die in his capital. He wanted one last triumph. He never made it. In August of 117 AD, in the small, stifling port town of Selinus in Cilicia, modern Turkey, the master of the world took his last breath.
Where did he hide it?
But even in death, there was drama. Trajan had no children. For 20 years, the question of succession had hung over him. His closest male relative was a cousin named Hadrian. Hadrian was brilliant, artistic, and totally different from Trajan. Trajan was a soldier. Hadrian was an intellectual. Trajan loved war. Hadrian loved Greek culture. Trajan had never officially adopted Hadrian. He hesitated. Perhaps he didn't think Hadrian had the grit. Perhaps he hoped for someone else. As Trajan lay dying, his wife, the formidable Empress Plotina, took charge. When Trajan died, the announcement was delayed. Suddenly a letter emerged, signed by the emperor on his deathbed, officially adopting Hadrian. Did Trajan really sign it? Or did Plotina guide the hand of a corpse? Or maybe she just forged it entirely? We will never know. But Plotina knew that without a clear heir, the civil wars would return. She did what was necessary to save the empire. Hadrian took the throne, and the first thing he did was look at Trajan's map, look at the bleeding legions in Mesopotamia, and say, no. Hadrian withdrew. He gave up the new provinces. He pulled back to the Euphrates. He realized what Trajan couldn't admit. The empire was overstretched. Trajan had captured a wolf by the ears. He couldn't hold it, and he couldn't let it go. Hadrian let it go. The soldiers were furious. The Senate was shocked. They felt Hadrian was dishonoring Trajan's legacy. But in hindsight, Hadrian likely saved the empire from collapsing under its own weight. Trajan's ashes were brought back to Rome. In a final, unique honor, they were not placed in a tomb outside the city walls, as was the custom. They were buried in the base of his column, in the heart of the city he built. He remained there, the soldier standing guard over his forum for centuries. Trajan's reign lasted 19 years. In the grand scope of Roman history, it's a heartbeat. But it was the heartbeat of a giant. He represents the Indian summer of Rome. Under him, the dream of a universal empire, one state, one law, stretching from the Atlantic to the Indies, seemed not just possible, but inevitable. His legacy is complicated. He was an imperialist. He waged wars of aggression for gold and glory. He enslaved tens of thousands of Dacians. By modern standards, he was a war criminal. By Roman standards, he was a god. But he was also a man who believed in the responsibility of power. He punished corrupt governors. He fed the poor. He built for the public good. He proved that an autocracy could work, provided the autocrat was virtuous. Centuries later, when new emperors were inaugurated, the Senate would shout a ritual wish, Felicio Augusto, Melior Traiano. May you be luckier than Augustus and better than Trajan. Being luckier than Augustus was hard, but being better than Trajan, that was impossible. He set the bar against which all other leaders were measured. He was the Optimus Princeps. Trajan shows us the seduction of conquest. He shows us the glory of building. But his final days on that Persian shore also teach us a lesson about limits. Even for the greatest conqueror, the world is always a little bit bigger than your grasp. Even the road of the legions has to end somewhere. Trajan's column still stands in Rome today. The paint has faded. The bronze statue of the emperor on top was replaced by St. Peter by a pope, and the noise of modern traffic surrounds it. But if you look closely at the stone, you can still see them, the legionaries crossing the bridge, the Dacians fighting for their homes, the emperor addressing his troops. It is a silent movie of a world that is gone, but an ambition that remains recognizable. What do you think? Was Trajan the greatest Roman emperor, or did his wars of expansion ultimately weaken the empire for the future? Was Hadrian right to pull back? There are so many other figures from this era we could cover. Decebalus the Defiant, or the mysterious Apollodorus who built the impossible. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Rome's greatest conqueror, please leave a like. It helps the channel conquer the algorithm, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next march into history. Let me know in the comments, which emperor should we profile next? The philosopher Marcus Aurelius or the madman Commodus? Until then, thanks for watching.